Today we have the amazing Emerson Schroeter. That's how I pronounce it, right? Got it. Me and Emerson go, I guess, way back, like 2 or 3 years already.
In the tech world, it's ancient history. I don't know.
Oh yes, so many things happened. Like
How many iPhone
a
iterations
pandemic
have
happened since. That's about it. Without further ado, take it away, Emerson.
Awesome. Let me figure out here how to share my screen, and I'm going to figure out with my dual monitor. Let's see. Can everybody see?
Yes, I can.
Excellent. Okay. I'm going to change this.
By the way, do you prefer to leave all of the questions to the end, or to answer them during, like whatever you want? That's what we'll do.
Okay. One second. I want to, sorry, this is something I should have done before. I would
All
like to
good.
stop sharing my screen. Hang on one second. I'm going to readjust because
No problem.
change the format of the thing. I want to make sure y'all will be able to see what you need to see. So,
All good. So welcome everyone. And you can also leave your question, everyone, in the Q&A. It will be easier for me to grab them from that part, from that area. And that's about it.
Cool.
Okay. Emerson, take it away.
Thank you. Okay, so thanks for being here to talk about inclusive UX writing. My goal today is that everybody walks away with at least a little something that they learned, hopefully something practical that you can apply to what you're doing. But I do want to, I've got question slides along the way. I'm going to pause. It's the teacher in me. I tend to pause very frequently and ask any questions. Does that make sense? And I'm not asking, does that make sense in a rhetorical way where I don't expect an answer. So like, let me know if something doesn't make sense, and you can drop a question in the chat, and we can clarify things. But
cool. I'll try to moderate it as well and help you out with all of those questions.
Perfect. So a little about me, so you know who you're dealing with. My name is Emerson. My pronouns are they, them. I'm a non-binary person. I'm a plant parent. I'm a cat servant. My cat might interrupt at some point. I've got her closed out of the room, so she hopefully won't. But she tends to get very angry at me when there's a door that's closed. So we'll see what happens. I'm senior UX writer at HelloFresh since February this year. It's a good time. Background in marketing, higher education. I taught English at university in Arizona for a while. Background in creative writing and other totally irrelevant odd jobs that actually do factor into UX writing. And if anybody has done a career pivot into UX writing, you know that wherever you come from, there's skills that you learn that you can use on the job. So quick disclaimer that I work at HelloFresh. I'm not speaking for HelloFresh. I'm also not an expert in inclusive design, accessibility, etc. But I'm very, very good at learning stuff and keeping myself on that growing edge. And really that's what inclusive writing is all about, as you're going to find out. And yeah, so that's me. So really quick in the chat, and Yuval, if you don't mind helping me with this, because I can't see the chat right now.
No problem.
Drop in the chat what's one thing, if you have something in mind that you're hoping to take away from this webinar, and this will give me a chance to just, it's a little user research, we'll call it.
So Dawn is saying that their background is also in marketing. Kevin wants to learn about inclusive writing advocacy. And I see that Wendy is also former higher education. Alexandra is hoping to learn more about UX writing in general. Julia wants to learn best practices, tidbits for inclusive writing. Emma, a thought process for how to continually keep inclusivity in mind while writing. Marie is talking about strategies to make sure our writing is inclusive.
Nice.
Sue is saying writing for people with learning disabilities. Claire is talking about hold on. Sarah is talking about help for creating the writing for inclusivity part of the style guide. Mm-hmm. Katerina is saying what a good point to start. Tikno saying tips for tricks tips and tricks to make the writing more inclusive, Draper best practices and how inclusivity relates to accessibility. So we have 35 more. So we'll just go skim through it. Maybe people talking about examples. Anya is saying increasing the awareness of inclusive writing.
Okay.
How to think more inclusively and communicate it. Those little moments where you can make the audience feel included. Megan, best techniques for writing forms that are inclusive. And last but not least, Fanny, same as Heather said, trying to establish an inclusive design and writing style within my department and to find the words to convince other people its importance. And Valentina is saying ideas.
Okay, awesome.
Okay.
Awesome. Thank you for that, Yuval.
No problem.
So I think you're all going to probably walk away with something. If you have some of these more practical things like how to design inclusive forms, stuff like that, I want to work that in if there's time, because I don't have some of that explicitly built in. But the rest of those that I heard, I think everybody's going to walk away with at least a little something. So mission accomplished. I hope. We'll see. So this is the plan. We're going to talk about what is inclusion and inclusive design. I'm going to start at the very beginning. What does it have to do with UX writing? How to become an inclusive UX writer, and we'll include some best practices. I've linked a variety of resources throughout the presentation. Some of these, one in particular, is you have to buy it, and I'm not getting anything for saying this is a great book, you should read it. Just putting that out there. Also, a few of the slides in this deck have animated GIFs. There's no more than one per slide. If that is a problem, say so in the chat, message me or Yuval directly, and I'll just pop in there really quick and delete them if it's a problem for you in any way. So just let me know. Okay, so I say before we start, we've started. Let's start with this question. What does it take to be an inclusive UX writer? We're going to talk about what you don't need and then what you need. So what you don't need is a checklist of what language not to use or to use to avoid being accidentally racist, ableist, ageist, sexist, etc. Checklists are great, and they only get you so far, because it's not just about what to say or what not to say in terms of how to talk about someone with disabilities, for example. These only take you so far, and a lot of times it's going to vary based on context, based on the project, based on the people that you're talking about. So those only go so far. You don't need a big budget, although some investment on the part of the business, your managers, is part of what can make your efforts successful, but it's not necessarily something that you have to have. You don't need to be a walking encyclopedia of how to do inclusion. Inclusion is not something that you can check off. It's not something that's ever going to be done. It's a continuous and ongoing process, and you'll see more of that as we go. And you don't need to get it right all the time. Don't put that pressure on yourself. Understand at the very beginning, you're going to mess up. You're going to make mistakes, because we're all humans. We're all coming at this with our limited perspectives, with our identities, our backgrounds, our experiences. And as much as that is an asset on the job and what we're doing, we're bringing ourselves to our work, right? We also bring who we're not to work, in the sense that we have stuff to learn. So there's what you don't need. Here's what you do need. Were gifts a problem for anyone? I can go in and take them out. Has anybody said anything yet, Yuval?
Hold on. Okay. Nobody said it's an issue. Okay. And if it's an issue, just let us know.
Okay, cool. I'm also a big fan of Schitt's Creek, so you're going to see plenty of that through here. So what you do need is, and this is absolutely essential, is the ability to call yourself out, to recognize mistakes, to recognize knowledge gaps, to recognize those times where, oops, you did a thing, you didn't know any better, and to call yourself out on that. Following that, you need an ability to call yourself into a learning process, curiosity and continuous learning. I'm going to say more about these things later, so I'm not going to go on and on about it right now. You need the ability to hold yourself and others accountable, and with some grace. You know, it doesn't have to be a harsh thing of like, oh, you're not being inclusive. That's not what this is about. This is about recognizing where we have a place, an area where we need to learn, taking the opportunity to learn what we need to learn, and then applying those learnings to our work. And I just said learn and learnings a lot, but it's a lot about learning. So moving from there, you need an understanding of the business case for inclusive design and writing. So as some of you have already realized, you need to be able to advocate for it in ways that make sense to all of your stakeholders and decision makers. That requires communication and collaboration skills. Inclusion is not a one-person show. It is a team sport. It is the only way that you can do it. And so being able to communicate what needs to be done, being able to collaborate well, but this is also part of what it takes to be a UX writer in general. So patience and empathy, and ideally a friend or two who you can share ideas with, vent, celebrate small wins along the way. Inclusion is also a long game. It's not going to be something that you can make these typically. Sometimes it happens, these massive strides just overnight and boom, 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 fixed, everything's inclusive. It's a long game. It's a lot of smaller changes that add up to something bigger, typically. All right. So we're going to start at the very beginning with what is inclusion and inclusive design. And here's my first second promo, if you count Heartstopper. But so Mismatch, this is a book by Kat Holmes, who has been UX leadership at Microsoft, Google, and I think that she's at Salesforce now. This book is absolutely, if you need to understand at a high level what inclusive design is and how to make business sense of that, this book is an absolute must read. She's not going to break down the numbers of how this is going to impact sales or anything like that, but she gives you an idea of the strategic approach, the business strategic approach that you can take to telling stakeholders, showing stakeholders the importance of inclusion. We're going to get into some of what she talks about in this presentation. But yeah, so inclusion is allowing and actively, emphasis on actively, creating opportunities for people to participate equally. Participating equally in a moment, a product experience, whatever it might be, no matter who they are, no matter their identity, background, abilities, experiences, gender, sexuality, anything, okay? No matter who they are, you're giving them the opportunity to participate equally. Inclusive design is the intentional and continuous process of seeking out exclusion. And Kat Holmes talks about exclusion as mismatches. So pausing this definition really quickly to talk about this just a minute. Disability, and Kat Holmes is not the only person who views it this way, but disability, she explains it as, and others do, as a mismatch. It's not the problem of the disabled person. It is a design problem, essentially. It's a mismatch between this person's needs and the way that the world is designed. So you're looking for moments of exclusion, you're looking for mismatches. And that's what inclusive design is about, finding those mismatches and then iterating, designing, doing what we do to find inclusive solutions to those problems. So baseline, that's what it's about, okay? Inclusive design and inclusive writing, I consider these very, very similar, except that the other is a little bit more words heavy, so. All right, I just talked a lot. I'm gonna have a sip of tea. You can think about that for a second. Okay, so further on that, this diagram is one that Kat Holmes uses in all of everything that she does. So you have the big circle, and inside that circle, we have the in group, and outside that circle, we have the out group, okay? Inclusive design is a choice not to open the circle and ask the out people to come in, or to open the circle and then the in crowd loses something. We're not taking something away from them. The choice is to make the circle more inclusive, to make a bigger circle, in a sense, to include more people when we design that circle. And you'll see more of how this plays out in a minute. Okay, that's a lot of information. So I'm going to back up and give you a second. Do we have any pressing questions at the moment, or should I continue with?
There is one question. So Putu is asking, and maybe this is going to be a stupid question. There aren't stupid questions, by the way. And do we need to be inclusive all the times? How if we intentionally make something that is hard for common people to use, for example, UX for nuclear launcher, so not everyone can launch a nuclear war?
I would say that even with something like that, it needs to have good UX, and good UX is inclusive UX. If it's not, then you get a mess on your hands, because even the people who are using that tool can't use it properly and are likely to launch a nuclear weapon. So I would say yes. I would feel safe saying, yeah, we should be inclusive all the time. As inclusive as possible, as often as possible. And of course, there's always constraints, but yeah.
What if there is some kind of like one inclusiveness that creates exclusiveness? You know what I mean? Like if one type of inclusiveness just exclude other group of people, if that makes sense.
I think, that's a good question. I feel like it's going to depend on the context, honestly.
Okay.
And we'll talk more about this, but often like the users we have in mind don't always just have the, we're going to get to this. We're going to get to this.
Okay.
Yeah, I would say with product ideas, if we're talking about just general product ideas, if you're creating a safe space for underrepresented groups, for example. So if there's an app that is for women, then it should be inclusive of all women, including trans women. And it's okay in that instance if it excludes men, including trans men. You know what I mean? That sort of a thing. But yeah, we'll get a little bit more into this in a little bit. So yeah.
Thanks.
Other questions there to get to?
So excellent answer. Great example. And thank you, Emerson. Okay.
All right. So this is the inclusive panda. Don't try and take in all the information. We're going to focus on a few parts here. The first thing we want to pay attention to is this bigger circle, the panda's head. These are our participants. Now imagine for a minute that we are designing an app together. We're working on this together. The participants this would be anybody who's using our app, okay? Now, the included crowd, the panda snout, do you call it a snout? It's that part of the nose, okay? That part of the face. These are the users that we are actively and intentionally designing to meet their needs, all right? So chances are you fit into this category for some of the digital products that you use, especially if you use a product and you enjoy using it. And you feel like, oh, this is like, I really vibe with this app or whatever it is, you're in this crowd, more than likely, okay? This crowd, the pandas, the little button nose, is people who are trying to actively and intentionally design for, but failing because they still feel excluded in some ways. And I'm going to give you an example of this. While I'm doing that, if you feel like it, there's no pressure on this. And we're not going to read them out loud, but others in the chat can read them. Have you experienced this before where it's like, it's clear someone tried to design this to meet your needs, but you still feel left out? So if this has happened to you before, like, how was that for you? You can drop something into the chat if you want to. There's no pressure on that. I'm going to give you an example. So I'm transgender, non-binary, and I did a study, this has been about 2 years ago now, of dating apps, because it's something that gender is like, it's a part of that world, you know? And so I found this it's a common model within dating apps, or at least it was at the time, where I would be allowed to identify my gender correctly, which is just thrilling for me as a non-binary person. I'm like, oh my gosh, they're letting me like accurately identify my gender, which is amazing. But then show me to people who are looking for men or women. So you have to pick one, which immediately is like, but that's not what I am, right? And so it creates a moment of exclusion. And then if you come over to the second screen in the flow, who do you want to date? Men, women, or everyone? There are a lot of a lot of queer people who I know who will date women, who will date non-binary, gender fluid, etc., and really can't, for very personal reasons, can't date cisgender men. And so this is a moment of exclusion for them as well, or it just creates more problem for them. Yeah. So you see where that fits into this button nose. Okay. They tried to design for me. They ultimately, in that sense, they kind of failed. All right. Now the next category is the left ear. These are people who we're not actively and intentionally designing for them, for their specific needs. And so they are excluded. They experience exclusion somewhere within the product. Now, some of these people are users for our app anyways. They're like, oh, okay, I'll deal with it. They deal with it anyways. Others, some of them are going to be like, you know what? No, screw this. I'm not going to, and they delete, they abandon, right? Some of them just don't ever even use the app because they don't realize that it would be something that would be helpful to them. So you could look at this part, the upper part of the left ear, is like an unexplored market in a sense, which is what we're talking about there with when exclusion, like to include, we end up excluding. I would say really question that, because creating a more inclusive product is generally good for business, although there may be specific cases where I would revise that, but yeah. Okay, so we look at these two red zones. Who tends to experience exclusion? Tends to be, and this is not always the case, but it tends to be people from underrepresented groups. We're talking people of color, we're talking disabled people, we're talking queer, non-binary, transgender people, we're talking about people who land somewhere outside the bell curve, okay? They're not the average user. And this is not always the case, and you'll see in a minute why that is. But underrepresented groups is a really, really broad category, and so we need to narrow that down. So for the purposes of this webinar, we're going to narrow this down to disability, partly because it has some really good practical applications for us as UX writers. So the How Many People tool is a really great tool that you can plug in how many users you have, and it gives you these numbers. Now, the numbers are based on UK stats. So, hey, for the purpose of this webinar, let's pretend we're all in the UK. We have this app that we've designed, and say we have around 100,000 users, all right? Now, there are more excluded users at any given point in time than you might assume, because if we're not specifically designing to meet these needs that you see in these numbers, then we're probably going to end up excluding people, all right? So out of 100,000 users, I'm going to highlight just a few of these numbers. 74,000, most of our users wear glasses or contact lenses. We don't think of that as disability, but it is a need of the human body that requires adaptive technology, okay? Glasses or contacts, and therefore needs to be considered. Other numbers I want to highlight, almost 15,000 of our users have a lower literacy level. And so the reading level that we're writing at, the grade level that we're writing at, is something to consider. 9,000 who are dyslexic, 4,500 with color vision deficiency, 3,000 blind or partially sighted, 1,000 who are autistic, and we go from there. Now, no tool is perfect. We've broken color vision deficiency down by male and female, which completely erases the fact that there are probably intersex people who have color vision deficiency. I'd be curious to see those numbers, but no tool is perfect. What I do like is that they include this almost all section, which really highlights the fact that temporary and situational disability also occurs. And we'll talk about that in a minute. I know I keep saying we'll talk about that in a minute, but we are going to get there. So I recently, where was this? I don't remember exactly where I heard this discussed. Somebody talking about breaking the population down into, okay, so you have users with disabilities, and then you have the people who are not yet disabled, because, you know, we're all getting older. And chances are, most, if not all of us, if we stay alive, will experience some degree of disability, some degree of then exclusion, unless the world becomes a much, much better place very, very quickly. Okay, now I'm not going to play this video. I will get the link to it. Maybe I can provide that, Yuval, to go out with the recording, possibly.
Sure, I can grab it real quick and share it in the chat
Cool.
as well.
Awesome. Thank you so much. I want to talk about this idea, and then I want to dig into what it actually looks like in practice. This video, Kat Holmes gives some good examples, but you can also find those examples in this video, and you can check out this UX Planet article that I wrote a while back. But I want to talk about this idea of the paradox of specificity. So the paradox of specificity tells us that if we adapt our efforts to the needs of a more specific audience, if we zone in on a more specific set of user needs, we're very likely to create solutions that are useful to a much broader audience. And there are a lot of examples of this. Let's look at what that, sorry. Let's look at what that looks like then in practice. The reason this holds true is that people experience similar needs for different reasons in different contexts and for different periods of time. All right, so this schematic comes from Microsoft Office, or Microsoft, their inclusive design toolkit, which Kat Holmes had a hand in creating. In case you haven't noticed, I'm a Kat Holmes fan, like total brain crush on this person. But I really like it because it breaks it down into different senses, which this is not exhaustive in terms of disability. This is not a complete list. It gives us a sense of what we can consider. Then breaks it down into permanent, temporary, and situational disabilities. So for this hypothetical app that we're designing, we might then, so 3,000 of our hypothetical users could be blind according to the data, right? So say we go into this process and we design an app that works perfectly for blind users. We make it so that not only can they get in and they can accomplish what they need to accomplish here, but they can even enjoy doing it. Maybe it's a delightful experience, all right? If we pull that off, we've also designed an app that works well for people who have temporary vision loss. So it's not just those 3,000 users, it's other ones who have an eye injury, who have cataracts, who have, maybe they had eye surgery. If you're like me, you step out in Berlin on a windy day and something blows into your eye and you can't see out of both eyes for 2 weeks. So suddenly the audience is much bigger that we're designing for. If we design something that works for them, we're designing something that works for an even broader audience. I don't like a distracted driver in this example because I don't want to encourage people to use an app while they're driving. But you step outside and there's a glare on your screen. You can't see the screen clearly for whatever reason. This app would also work in that instance. And we can go intersectional with this as well in terms of maybe you have a person or a group of people who have more than one disability, which is, it happens. So say we have somebody who has one arm and they're blind. If we design an app that works really well for them, we're designing for all of these people and people who have similar needs for different reasons and different periods of time. All right, so that's the paradox of specificity at work. And this is also an important part of justifying the business case for inclusive design, for inclusive UX writing, is you're looking at what is the actual impacts of designing an inclusive product. It's much bigger than, oh, well, it's going to work well for those 3,000 users. It's much bigger than that, all right? So questions specifically about the paradox of specificity or anything we just now discussed?
All right, so question is how to find the how many site. What should I look for in order to share it right now?
Can I turn this into a PDF, Yuval, and that gets sent out with the recording as well?
Yeah.
Yeah, because then you can just click on the link and it's there.
Sounds perfect. So
yeah.
yes, just pass it to us and we'll share it with the recordings.
Perfect. So you'll have the link. Yep.
Yep.
Excellent. Any other questions before we move?
Oh, when you asked the question before, when did people felt excluded even though people tried? So people said many. The main reason was the ethnicity. Like based on their based on their ethnic, basically. That's where they felt excluded mostly. And a lot of follow-up comments on the dating app experience that you shared. Also titles like Mr., Mrs., and so on as well.
Germany is terrible for this. Oh my Lord. It's just Herr or Frau. It's got to be one or the other, you know? So, yeah. It makes me sad to hear that ethnicity is a very common, even just in like those of you here, is a common basis for exclusion. It's just like, what year are we living in, you know? Anyway, all right. We're going to move forward.
Any other question, anyone? Yeah. This is your time. If not, we'll have more room for questions afterwards as well.
Yes.
Okay, so I think we're good.
Cool. Okay, that's a lot of information. I didn't give you a warning. I'm sorry about that. These are for screen grabs. I'm sorry about all the chaos. Context here. This is an app that I really love. I am in love with almost everything that Volt does. If you're Berlin based or you live somewhere where Volt operates, it's a food delivery app, not unlike Uber Eats or like Postmates or something like that in the US. And I enjoy their UI. The UX is, for the most part, just really lovely. Their UX writing is just, oh, I love it so much. So I wanted to give you a sample of kind of a flow, and this isn't every screen within that flow, but it's a sampling. And I want you to just notice what types of copy we have here. Just take a minute to note. Okay, we've got some headings. We've got tags and labels like free delivery, minimum order 10 euros. We've got ratings and these little icons, right, that work really well with the copy that's placed there. You understand it all in context, right? There's UI telling you, okay, look, we can click on this and it's probably going to open up our order here. Tipping element, right? How much of this is copy? If you imagine all of this without copy, what happens? Is this a navigable experience? Is this a use? Can you do anything? Not really, right? If you take all the copy out of this, you're going to have some icons and pictures of food. I think that's about it. Which I don't get on Volt to look at pictures of it. Sometimes I get on Volt to look at pictures of food. I can't say that I never do that. Let's be honest. I work at HelloFresh. I like food. But the reason we use Volt and apps like this is to go and get food. We want it delivered to our place of residence typically. Okay, so it needs to work for us. So this screen in the flow, so this fourth one here, this is the checkout flow. And it's the bottom of that screen. This is the top of that screen, just to give you some context. You would have no reason to know that really. There's some indications. You have the person, the little icon of the person on the bike. You have a chat thing, which I don't know what that would be related to. Certainly not if you've never used Volt. There's a little door with a bag outside of it. And then there's a toggle button. And then, oh, payment. Hey, I know what the page is for, right? These are our cues. Now, if even these were not for some reason accessible to you, good luck navigating this page, right? Here's what it's supposed to look like. I'll give you a second to just look at that. Now, it's not possible to fully equate, and I don't like doing that kind of an exercise of being like, imagine that you're blind, because we can't do that. That isn't our experience. And if you take a screen like this and you can have the most flawless copy, and we all know, okay, we know as UX writers, we know how much work it can take to get copy like this on the screen. We know how much collaboration that can take. We know how much research that can take. We understand this. We can do all of that work. We can have the most flawless copy on the screen, and it's still not good UX writing if it's not inclusive, because if we're not making it usable to our 3,000 users who are probably, our 3,000 users who are probably using, I'm saying using and user, 3,000 people who use our app with a screen reader, then we're giving them maybe something that's as useful as this, perhaps, you know? And that's not not even, I wouldn't even say that's not just a moment of exclusion. That's absolute a lack of usability, you know? So that's to give you some idea of what all this has to do with UX writing. Okay. So considering who we have in the room, I'm going to assume that we agree, we understand that a massive part of digital product design is content. It's what words appear on the screen, when and where those land in the visual design and the user experience, and how those words help users from one point to the next. All right, we understand that. Now let's take this 3 bullet point list and let's expand it just a little bit. All right. So if we think about those users who are excluded, who we're either trying to design for or we're not, either way, they're excluded. Let's expand that list. It's not just what words are there, it's what words land on and off the screen, when and where those words land in the visual design and in the overall UX, how the UX changes from one device to the next, and with or without assistive technology like screen readers. How those words help users from one point to the next, and in bold here, how to adapt the conversation with varying needs and contexts. Remember the chart from Microsoft. How do we make sure that this conversation works for someone, no matter like if everything is just operating at optimal everything, there's no disability that we need to consider, there's nothing. How do we make it work well for them, and also for someone who has a temporary, permanent, or situational disability going on? How do we make it adapt to that context? And then how do how the information and elements are structured on the screen and behind the curtain in the code. Now, that does not mean you need to learn how to code to be an inclusive UX writer. But it does mean that you should probably have some understanding, or you will probably grow some understanding over time of how the code aspect of all of this works, so that you can collaborate more fully with your awesome devs while they do their magic. So inclusive UX writing takes into account all the usual suspects, these things that we know, right? User research, goals, needs, pain points, business and stakeholder goals and requirements, information architecture, character counts, all of those things. We could all like collaborate and make a very long list of the usual things that fill our days, right? But it also factors in and looks out for overtly excluding or harmful language like racism, ableism, sexism, any of the isms, but also things like directional language. Please read below. It's not below for somebody who's using a screen reader. And this can be just a little moment of like, well, I wasn't really thinking about you when I wrote this. Okay. So inclusive UX writing also factors in more specific user needs and edge cases. Edge cases is a pet peeve of mine. I feel like there's a time and a place for it. That's fine. But I feel like it's often used as a sort of dismissive, oh, it's just a few users, you know? And I often wonder, what if we talk to those users and find out what is like the big problem for them? With maybe it's 3 of our users. What is the big problem for them? If we solve that one big problem for those 3 users, who else are we solving a problem for? I'm betting it's more than those 3 users. So it's also paying attention to that. It's looking at things like color contrast, link copy, alt copy, things like this. Some of the things that land in the Venn diagram, kind of between the words and the UI, the visual design. It's also paying attention to content containers and reading order. Content containers is a thing that comes into the coding side of this, but it impacts the reading order with a screen reader. You want to make sure things are going to be read in a way that makes sense to those users, and for other assistive technology. Tabbing order for keyboard navigation, and there's always more. This is not an exhaustive list. It's just the list goes on and on and on, and there are bullet points on that list that you're only going to discover as you approach projects, as you're thinking about which users am I not thinking about? Who are the edge cases here? When you start thinking about that, you start recognizing more bullet points on this list that also then, as you're populating this list, you're also populating a checklist of like what to do with your learning and development time and things that you need to learn. Okay. So that's inclusive UX writing in a nutshell. Yeah. So we're going to get into practical stuff, resources, tips. If there's time, I'd like to show you a little bit of how a screen reader might work. But all that said, questions? Anything?
All right. So any questions? So Michelle is asking, do you have a strong feeling about how inclusive it is to have a message on a website, in quotes, if you need an alternative version of this information, contact end quotes, and the link to a form or something like that?
Yeah. My gut on that, and I would want to think about this more and of course see it in context, but like my gut on that is, I guess it's better than nothing. But if there's an alternate version, why is that not somehow available to people? Yeah, to me, it's like, maybe an opportunity to try harder, or to give that more time. That's my gut on that.
All right. And Claire is asking if UX writers are being brought into, in quotes, AdWords and quotes on things that are already 90% built. For example, how do you advocate for a more accessible experience within our scopes? Best practices for pushing back on things that really should be better.
Mm-hmm. So long before this happens, I recommend getting coffee regularly with your POs, making friends with them, because that's a lot of the buy-in that you need is your PO, right? Or your project managers, product owners. Get to know and get friendly with your designers and your devs, because if there's a major concern around inclusion, you need to be able to push back, and to really show. To me, in those moments, the most helpful thing is to be able to create empathy, because very few people, let's say very few people, nobody I've ever worked with is actively trying to cause harm, right? And if you can show them like, look, this is really going to create a really kind of shitty moment for this person or this group of users. Simple fix here. What if we do this? Or even if it's not such a simple fix. And there are ways to negotiate these things, because even if it's not a simple fix, you can say like, okay, so how in the long term do we deal with this? If we can't fix it right now, how in the long term do we deal with this? And take as much initiative in that as you can, is my recommendation there. And I think I've lost my train of thought. I was going somewhere with that, and now I don't remember what it was. I'm so sorry.
It's all good. It happens
Yeah,
to me all the time.
gone. Oh.
All right. So Anna Lockwood is asking, okay. So I'm an accessibility and inclusion advocate for UX in my company. Hey, Anna, by the way, good to see you here. Do you have websites where you take data from explaining the importance of these and maybe showing statistics that would make stakeholders happy?
I think it depends on who your stakeholders are and what kind of data they're going to want to see. So everything is UX. Think about your users, think about the audience, and adapt the kind of data you're looking for to that audience. And so it's difficult to answer that question. I default again to empathy. The how many people app is, yeah, it's based on UK stats, but there will be variations from one country to the next, of course. But it still gives you a ballpark. It's a striking visual too, in any sort of like business meeting or something. You're trying to show like, okay, so we have 800,000 users. That's like, I forget the number on that. It's like 24,000 people who would be likely blind or partially sighted. That's a small city, creating empathy around those things. I don't have any go-to websites for that, because I tend to source at HelloFresh. I would tend to source internal UX research that we have, where I would work with a UX researcher to gather some of that data. Yeah, I hope that's a helpful answer. It's a difficult one to answer. Yeah.
All right. Thank you. Carol is asking, is the Panda diagram available for download? And will the recordings be available? So yes, about the second questions and about the first one.
I've got it linked. It's also linked on that slide. So
perfect.
Yeah.
So we'll get it in the email.
Definitely.
Thank you for the questions. Anna is asking, how do you get around directional language if your designers are insistent that you tell the user where to go?
I don't like saying never, but I feel like saying it's never absolutely necessary. You can always say, so if it's like, if you need to say scroll down to do such and such, then your call to action is not close enough to the place where they need to take the action. So like, you really need to think about then the designers, then working with the designers to think about the information hierarchy there, the architecture. I feel like directional language is never really needed. Challenging when you come to like maybe social media, where you're talking about like swipe up or tap or something like that, but that's more gesture or action oriented than it is directional. So I would say, yeah, it's usually going to be a matter of pushing back on where things are located, or just suggesting like it's more actionable usually to say something like, instead of uh, click below to register for the event. Thinking about events right now. You can just say register for the event. There's your CTA and it's there and it's tidy and concise. Yeah. Most designers are going to appreciate that too. So, yeah.
All right, thank you. So if anyone have any more questions, put it in the Q&A, and I think we should move forward.
Yeah.
Because we're getting a bit short on time.
We are. Let me see here really quick where we're at. Okay, so I'm going to give the audience a choice right now. We can go into, because keep in mind the slides are going out with linked resources. So I have some of these where I'm talking about things that you need to do, tips, things like that, resources. So we can talk, I can talk through those slides, or I can take you down here and we can talk about, I can show you some screen reader stuff.
Maybe we can make a small poll for it if you want.
Yeah, if it can happen.
Screen reader versus what's option number one?
So resources and tips versus screen reader stuff.
Okay, so tips and screen reader stuff. And okay, so just created a poll and launched it. Okay, so now you can vote on it. Hold on. So we are, screen reader is winning, tips is almost winning, so we're at 60% on screen reader stuff.
Okay, all right, yeah, that makes sense.
That was a close call, by the way.
Yeah. All right, so then let's do this. Let's do this thing.
We have to do another session one day.
Yeah, seriously. Yeah. I'm going to do this as quickly as possible, so hopefully we still have some time for questions. Is it possible for us to go a little over, you all?
Yes.
Okay. All right. So for screen reader, we're just going to do this. I'm going to take you to Volt. Okay. Now, most devices will have a built-in screen reader. Android and iOS or Apple devices have one. In Apple devices, it's VoiceOver. And so can you all see my full screen?
Yes.
Okay, cool. So we go to VoiceOver. Now I'm going to enable this, and I want to warn you that there's going to be probably some clatter. I don't know how loud this is going to be in your speakers. We'll let it say its first thing and then check in, but have your voice controls at the ready just in case. Okay.
But by the way, you need to share with audio. Did you make sure to share your screen with audio? So you can stop share and then share, and then you need to have like
thank you.
Opt in for share with audio.
Share sound.
Yes.
Doesn't let me. Oh, no.
What?
No, it doesn't.
Hold on, let me promote you to be a host, and maybe then it will work. Hold on. Sorry about that. Okay. Now you can. Now you're.
There we go. All right. So
thank you so much.
Can you see Volt on the screen?
Yes.
Okay. So the way this is going to work is you will enable your screen reader here. I'm going to turn the volume down on mine because I don't want the chaos right now. Let's see. I think, is this going to make sense for y'all? Is it going to make sense for me to show it to you if you can't hear it? You know, I'm going to show you tabbing order instead, because I think that's going to make sense. So for any users who have to do keyboard only navigation, it's a lot of tabbing, space bar, enter, this sort of thing. Okay, so I've got a finger on the tab key right now, and I hit tab, And look at this. Volt is, I have such a crush on this product, y'all. Volt they're amazing. So
I
one of the
also use
best
it a lot, by the
things
way.
to do, what's that?
I also use it a lot, by the way,
They're amazing,
in
right?
Israel.
One of the first things you need to do for assistive technology, for screen readers, for keyboard navigation and such, is to give people the option to skip the top navigation and get to the main content. So we hit tab the first time, and this is in German, I don't expect you to know it, but the first one, the one that's highlighted right here, I'm pointing like y'all can see what I'm pointing at. The first one here is the main content, and this is the footer. So it allows us to skip down. So we can skip down to the main content. And there we are. We hit tab. Now for keyboard navigation, every time you hit tab, it's going to go to an interactive element, something that's clickable or something that you need to type in, right? So you see the keyboard focus right here around Berlin. All right, I'm going to hit tab and it comes here. I hit tab and it comes here. And here we go. Now, it's not always true that what is navigable in keyboard navigation is going to operate well with a screen reader, but I have found bugs, I'll call them accessibility issues with HelloFresh, where the first cue I had was I was doing keyboard navigation and I realized, okay, it's skipping over this whole section of this page. And then I tried it in screen reader and it read everything in the screen reader, but nothing was interactive, and it was a fully interactive page. And so keyboard nav can be a really good way of finding some accessibility issues. One issue that I found here is I was tabbing through, where was this? So let's go into KFC. Okay, so we go into, say I've done this with keyboard nav or with a screen reader, and I've navigated to a particular product, right? And this looks really tasty to me. One thing I noticed as I was tabbing through today, okay, so you see the keyboard focus on the close box, and then you see it on the information tooltip. And then we come down, we have the check boxes. And then it skips. Did you see that? It skips to here. And it completely skipped this where you can add more or change the quantity. I noticed when I was checking it with a screen reader earlier today, it does the same thing in a screen reader. And there may be workarounds. I'm not fluent in screen reader. Okay, I'm going to work on that. It's in my 2023 goals. But so somebody who's fluent, who uses a screen reader far more regularly than I do, might have a workaround for this. But the fact that it just tends to skip over it is problematic, right? So these are some ways that you can go in and just start finding some of those issues. Yeah. Now, let me zip. Okay, the rest of this, I would say the rest of this is going to be information that we send the slides out to you in some form or in PDF. You should have what you need to kind of get started with that. I want to go back to questions since we're already over time. Oh, I can't hear you, Yuval.
Sorry. So we will try to make the best out of our time. We'll have 4 more minutes, 5 more minutes. A lot of people ask for 1 more session, so we could definitely take it
Nice.
offline. And if you're interested, we'll do that. By the way, there is a podcast episode with Emerson at Writers in Tech. This is the link. I recommend everyone to check it out. And by the way, if you're interested, and we'll try to work on part 2 if Emerson would be interested. And in the meantime, we can answer something like 3 more questions, then we'll wrap it up, and I'll see everyone in our next event.
Yeah.
So a question from Claire, from Sarah. Okay, so how can we combine being edgy, casual, using colloquialisms, cursors, and generally being very cheeky with being inclusive in a product? Where do you draw the line?
Such a good question. So I think where I draw the line is for me working at HelloFresh, translation. If this is something that isn't going to translate well, it's not going to be inclusive on like a very broad scale. So thinking about that, I think user testing, checking with your users. I draw the line where the users draw the line, you know. I think testing it with users who have maybe a cognitive disability or something like this. Users who are second language learners, users who are dyslexic or whatever, these sort of language comprehension concerns. I would check it with the users. Yeah.
All right. Okay, so a lot of people saying thank you. So many saying thank you so much.
I
Natalie,
appreciate
thank
that
you.
people are staying over. Thank you to those who.
Thank you everyone for staying. That's great.
Yeah.
We'll wrap it up. We'll work on part 2. Thank you so much. I also linked to the episode with Emerson for Writers in Tech. Check it out. It's really good. And if you haven't listened to a Writers in Tech episode, and this is your chance. Your first episode will be a good one. In addition to that, I wanted to recommend you to take our free UX writing course. If you haven't, that's a really nice taste for UX writing. If you haven't checked it out, we invested a lot of efforts, the team here, to make sure that it's good. So check it out. One last thing that I want to say is that our team was working very hard to create another course, a short course that's a Figma masterclass for UX writers. It's on sale because it's a pre-sale, so it's 50% off. So check it out. So that's about the Figma course. And that's about it. Emerson, thank you so much for being here today. It was fascinating.
Thanks for the invite. Can I just offer a quick plug for the UX Writing Academy?
Yeah.
I did the UX Writing Academy, and that's how I got my current job. So, hey, if you haven't and you're able to do it, it's worth it. So, yeah.
Yeah, thank you so much for the shout out. The UX Writing Academy, to those of you that don't know, is the program that is the flagship program of the UX Writing Hub. We invested a lot of efforts to build apps that connect mentors and students, and we have the whole job placement department to help our students to find a job afterwards. And if you would like to take it one day, I encourage you to do it. It would be fun. And if not, check out the free course. It's also pretty good. And that's about it. Thank you, Emerson.
Thank you. Y'all have a good night. Thanks for staying late.
Bye, everyone. Ciao.